many factors that determine whether you, for example, develop a post-traumatic stress disorder after a trauma. So it's gender can be important, your socioeconomic status, but it's also important, and this is also evident if you look at all the cognitive models about PTSD, that the way the event is processed and encoded in memory, so how I remember the trauma and how it's integrated into my own memory and my autobiographical memory is important. And it's also important how I appraise the trauma. For example, would I, if in case I would appraise it in a negative manner, we know that this can be a risk factor. So if I think it was my fault or the way I acted was very unhelpful, or a second important thing is once I have certain reactions towards or after the trauma, which is in fact a totally normal reaction. So there is something that was very intense, very frightening, that you have certain memories of the traumas. We call these intrusions, like these snapshots of, for example, images where you can maybe also hear something again or smell something, which are highly distressing and also kind of intrusive in your mind. If people start appraising these symptoms as something like, oh, this is something permanently changed for the worse, this I can't control, this something is going wrong, I have to avoid this, then you're starting this negative cognitive loop. Mm-hmm. And that's a very important route if you think of how a PTSD could develop after a trauma.
Mm-hmm. We're going to go in PTSD. I just want to slowly get into there. So let me give you this example. I'm a person who tends to overthink stuff. Exactly this, oh, this was my fault, Can you disentangle the effect on my psyche or my brain? So when there is a trauma event, let's say, is the effect of the trauma higher, worse, or the effect of this overthinking afterwards? Mm-hmm. Can you kind of disentangle these two events and then study them?
Yeah. So you would mean that you start assessing the circumstances around the trauma, like what was it, intensity, how did I feel, and your...
For example, the trauma per se, some traumatic event triggers already these responses. And then the thing is, I start thinking, oh, this was my fault, this, and start blaming myself for day 2, 3 months after the trauma. Can you kind of study these two effects based on different events? Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Well, with the processing of the event, we have questionnaires or tasks we are working with to try to infer the cognitive processing in relation to the trauma. So how do I think about it, or my appraisal style or interpretations? And the trauma itself, we could, what people do in therapy is work with narratives. So write down things and to see how the trauma is described. And we know that in PTSD it's very fragmented and incoherent. So there are certain trauma characteristics which are also not helpful. And if these two come together, I think then you're not in a very good situation. But I think both processes in isolation are dysfunctional, but definitely also in interaction. So if you have a trauma that had a high impact and which is, in terms of memory words, not very well integrated in your autobiographical memory because it's so different from what you experienced before or how you maybe define yourself as a person. And then in combination with having negative thoughts about it, I think that's a very bad combination, which would make you very prone to develop a PTSD.